Welcome to DIY Eco Guy. I'm your host, Chris Graber. I'm an engineer, a nature lover, and I'm concerned about climate change. This podcast is about simple DIY sustainability solutions you can implement in your home and community. I do the research and tackle projects at my house and share what I've learned with you. So let's have fun while making an impact on our world, one action at a time. Welcome to episode 4, finding a used electric vehicle and possibly taking advantage of the newer used EV tax credit the IRS is offering. That's something that I've taken advantage of recently, and it does actually work. So I'm going to be going into the cost of these older electric cars, how to find one, what search options there are, what kind of range you could expect, how far can you drive it in a day, how often do you have to recharge it. Dive into this new tax credit as well. As far as the charging, we'll discuss what that looks like at home or when you're out and about or at work, and what to do if you're living in an apartment. And I'll just talk about my general experience with owning an older electric car and just what it's like to drive one, etc. So I was always interested in electric cars. In college, I was a mechanical engineering major, and I believe it was after my junior year, I had an internship, and it was working at a local electronics company with some other engineers, and they had a project for the GM EV1, the first GM electric car that GM was leasing. And so I was tasked with creating this automatic tooling that would put together the relay or on-off switch for the car. So that was interesting, like computer-aided design work, etc. And after that, I always still just bought internal combustion engines for my cars, just standard cars. But I was always curious in electric cars and hoping to see them advance, and get more widespread. You might be interested to watch a documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car? It's all about the GM EV1. Spoiler alert, they end up taking them back from all the people leasing them, such as like Danny DeVito and these other actors in LA and stuff. They only offered a leasing option, and they took a bunch of them back and drove them out to the desert here in Arizona and like smashed a bunch of them. So you can see those horrible pictures. It was kind of a nightmare. The cars were actually pretty good. The batteries were starting to improve. People liked driving them. It was sort of an accidental thing for them that they got so popular. So it was a little bit tricky, I think, politically. Anyway, that's some of my background. So recently I found out, hey, there's a tax credit for used electric cars. It used to always be for new electric cars, but those were always very expensive, kind of out of my reach. So I started looking around, and turns out that, buying an older electric car from just from someone directly, a private party, could maybe end up being about the same as what you'd pay if you go through a dealership and then are able to use this tax credit. So since the tax credit only works if you buy through like a registered dealer, so it's a little bit tricky. I'll go into that more later, but I was able to go through that process. I got a 2015 Nissan Leaf, nice little car, seats 5, doesn't have a huge range, but it's our second car, so it's my primary car, but my wife has a standard, engine in her car. So I just need to be able to go shopping, pop around town, see some friends, go over to a mountain bike ride, just simple trips mostly. I can go down into downtown. There's charging down there when I'm out and about. So it is limited, the range varies depending on how hot it is, how cold it is, how much you're using the AC or the heater. Just are you driving quickly? Are there any hills, et cetera, et cetera. For Tucson, it's a lot of the driving here isn't on a freeway. It's like 40-mile-an-hour stop and go traffic on totally flat roads. So it's in some ways kind of an ideal place to own an older electric car. And I'm able to get around pretty well. I do have to watch the range. I can't go super far. But, I think I've maybe been able to eke like 70 miles total out of it, which really is actually quite far. I mean, you're driving around town, stop and go, like for hours. And if you need to, you can charge along the way. Now, this car is a little bit older. The charging situation with used electric cars, especially the options you have for charging, there's all these different connectors basically on the car, different ports that you plug into. And so every model could be a little bit different. This car has like a Japanese standard for the fast charging component of it. And there are only a couple of those around town, like at the Nissan dealership and up by the mall over here. So, now it looks like everything is going to be moving more to the Tesla charging standard. But anyway, so that's kind of something you need to research. And just in general, if you're getting one of these older EVs, there is a fair amount of research involved. So, I could just mention that there are local chapters of the Electric Vehicle Association. So it's like myeva.org. And I was able to connect with our local chapter and ask these guys questions. A lot of this is people that are early adopters on these EV technologies. They bought the first Teslas, the first this and that and the other. And so they got Leafs, when they started, I think in 2012 or 2013. Mine's a 2015. But so these folks know a lot about these older cars and how to keep them happy. So you can reach out. There's Facebook groups as well, local forums, and you can kind of ask around in your area, and you can get some great advice from people that are into this. Now, a lot of those people that are early adopters, they might have several of these older electric cars and know all about them. And they're probably buying the newest models, the most recent models, and wanting to sell their older cars. Or they know other people that are early adopters that are selling their older cars because the range is increasing dramatically. The new cars, right? 300, 400 miles, etc. So it's a whole different ball game. But if you're someone without, a lot of funds and you have limited need for, how far you're going to have to drive every day, you might want to consider looking at one of these used EVs. Sometimes the cost can be great. Mine, after the tax incentive or credit, it ended up being like the price of the mountain bike I want to buy, right? So like $5,000. And I mean, what car can you buy for $5,000 right now, right? Now, it can be a little bit tricky in terms of that price because they're changing rapidly, as more better, longer range models come out. The older EVs, they're kind of worth less and less. So you have to kind of be into it if you're going to buy one and realize, hey, the battery's going to keep degrading gradually and the range will get less and less. And You won't be able to resell it very easily, probably. So, a lot to kind of, consider there. But these batteries typically, if the car's been taken care of, these batteries, they can last a long time. So that's probably the main thing to consider. Also obviously the cost, but just what's that battery health looking like? So there's a lot of research you can do around the prices. You can look on, Kelly Blue Book and stuff like that and try to figure out, okay, what are things looking like, whether from a dealer or from a private party, and would this tax credit really help me out or not? Um, you know, the people that are selling these vehicles privately, they know a ton about their car. If you go to a dealer, the salesperson doesn't necessarily know a lot. You might know more than they do in terms of all the details. Like that was the case with me buying my older Leaf. So it's a little bit tricky to interact with some of the dealers, let's just say. Now, when it comes to the topic of range, I mentioned that can really vary. What kind of driving are you doing? Are you able to charge it at home and then drive around each day and get back home and just charge it at home? Or do you need to do longer trips around town? What's the, charging infrastructure in your town? Do you need to take regular trips out of town? If you don't have another car, one option is to just rent one. So, and I believe now Hertz actually rents Teslas as well. So you could try out one of those on a trip. They have the most extensive charging network, right? So, yeah, the range really going to depend on what kind of car you have, what size battery, and what the health of that battery is, and just what your charging options are. So, yeah, the range, you just kind of need to think that through a bit. It's probably one of the main things to think about, and one of the main things that people worry about. But you'd be surprised how far, one of these older electric cars can go and how well you can get around. And I was able to use a little tool that plugged into the car and ran this app before I was going to buy the car. And it told me all about the health of the battery and exactly what the health of each cell in the whole battery pack was like. So that was really cool that I found that Leaf Spy app and information about it, because it made me feel much more confident. When you get into an older electric car, you might see, oh, look, here's this sort of battery meter, and mine was on like 9 of 12 total bars. And that's somewhat, showing the health status of the battery, how much it's degraded through time. So you can somewhat rely on that. It will also show, a range estimate based on how you've been driving lately. That can vary widely. So it's a little bit tricky, especially if you're trying to look online for one of these cars. Like a lot of the search engines aren't really made for older electric cars. If you're trying to figure out what kind of charging capacity does the options does this have, what's the battery size? The battery size has often changed or increased through time. So with like the Nissan Leaf, it started out as a much smaller battery, and kind of year after year there was a gradual increase in the battery size and the range. So one good thing is if you're able to confirm that the battery is doing pretty well, there's so many fewer parts if you don't have an internal combustion engine and everything else involved with that. If you just have the battery and the motor, and you just need 4 wheels, the ability to turn and soak up some bumps and some comfy seats and a air conditioner and heater or whatever, it's a much simpler platform. So you're not going to have typically a lot of maintenance costs. You're going to need to rotate your tires. The cars are a little bit heavier sometimes, although a lot of the older EVs are smaller and have smaller batteries and are lighter, so they don't wear out their tires a lot of times to the same degree that people with newer EVs wear them out. So these cars are relatively simple as long as the electronics are working and the battery and the motor are working well and haven't been abused. You might be able to, get a lot more miles out of one of these efficient little cars and, not have to do very much maintenance. You might have to change some fluids here and there and keep your tires pumped up. These cars often have special tires so that they have better rolling resistance, and you want to keep them pumped up as well. So anyway, that's all about the cost, how to search for one. A lot of different options for searching. Kind of just look at all the options in your area, and you might get a little bit dizzy trying to search online, and I found a lot of the websites lacking in terms of their search filters and stuff. So you might have to kind of call around and go look around. And, you might end up just buying from a private party since they'll really know their cars. But if you can find a good deal at a dealership, that's something to think about too. So I guess we can go into that next, the tax credit portion. For that, I looked into all this for 2023. They have a really good guide on the Current Auto site for 2024. So you can check that out. It's recurrentauto.com. So the basics are the used EV tax credit is 30% of the sale price up to a maximum credit of $4,000. So it can be, several $1,000s that you might get back. So I went through that whole process and it worked. You have to have your dealership send the IRS the correct information so you can take part in this. So you might want to make sure that your dealership has done this before or knows what it is and is all ready for all that. So you can go look. I have more information on my website on an article about this on DIYEcoguy.com with different links. There's like the IRS used clean vehicle credit page. There's a list of qualified vehicles. So they tell you which models this applies to, and it isn't necessarily all of them. I think when I looked in 2023, Tesla wasn't on there, so that was sort of a shock, because there are a lot of used Teslas around. This is all, and I don't know how that's changed, this is all part of the Inflation Reduction Act, and so there are rules around it. If you're going to take part in this tax credit, like I said, the vehicle has to be sold by a licensed dealer, not a private party. The car has to be more inexpensive, so less than $25,000. There are some income limits. And to just get into the different charging options briefly, you might want to think about, what are your options potentially at home or when you're out and about on the town, or if you live in an apartment like I mentioned. So what I ended up doing is I just plug into a normal outlet in my garage. My car is able to charge overnight that way. If I plug it in during the day, it's running off our solar panels, which that feels really nice. Not all these older cars will charge that fast. I made sure that my model had a special kind of internal component on it that allowed it to charge quickly enough. So that's something to really ask about or to research. You'll hear about charging in terms of level 1, 2, or 3, and with 1 being the slowest, 3 being the fastest, or DC quick charge. So there are these different speeds of charging. There's also what your car can handle or your charging equipment can handle. A lot of different variables here. And so there are all these different plugs that fit different cars. So that's something to research a bit and understand. My car has two different plugs. It has the DC fast charger. It also has just kind of like the standard level 2, which you can find around town a fair amount still, but is maybe gradually fading away. And then you can also just plug it into a wall, into a normal socket. So I didn't go for the home charger option that's faster. I did some research and it was going to cost a couple $1,000s to get a special line extended from my circuit breaker over to my garage, and then special equipment mounted in the garage. And so since I'm able to just charge overnight and I'm not a heavy driver anyway, that's working for me, for now. And if you get to, going out and about on town and trying to figure out where you can charge, you should check out PlugShare. It's a really cool website and app that shows you all the different chargers. So you can plug in and make a profile for your car and what types of charging options it has, and then it'll show you a map of your town, and you'll get to see, what is offered around my town, and there are user reports. So this station is broken over here, or etc. And just know there are all different companies running these chargers. So some of them are free, some of them you pay while you're using it, some of them you pay for a parking cost. And it's a little bit confusing because you need a different app set up for every different company that's out there. So you need to go look on PlugShare and see, what are all these different companies and options around my town, and set up all those apps, get everything set up ahead of time in there and understand how to use it so that you're not out and about and scrambling and trying to figure it all out when you first show up to one of these. So that's a little bit tricky. That was a little bit of a learning curve there for sure. And the apps work different ways. Sometimes it's like you just pay for what you just use. Sometimes they require you to have like a credit card on file and have a little balance, there ready to be used for your charging. And then you have to keep, increasing, or putting more money onto that balance periodically. So a lot to kind of research there to try to figure out. And then most of the payments just are happening directly through the app. Some of them you can still go up and just like use a credit card. You don't have to have an account. Kind of all these different options. So you need to figure that out. And the topic of charging at an apartment. So a lot more apartments are putting in charging stations, but that might be a little bit tricky for you. If there aren't great options at your specific apartment, think about what public charging stations are nearby. You could get topped off and then not have to worry about it too much. Or maybe there's just a standard like 110 volt plug somewhere at your apartment that would be easy to plug into to kind of trickle charge. So you definitely want to think through those different options if you live in an apartment. And maybe you could talk to the apartment management about getting more chargers installed, or other, companies with chargers that are public, to see if they could install one closer to your apartment. So a lot of different things to think through that for sure if you're living in an apartment. And just the last couple things that I thought of if you're buying through your used EV through a dealer. So you can ask them, what's the current battery capacity, state of health, expected range. That the responses to that might vary, but you could ask. The salesperson might not be an EV expert. You could ask them, is the battery still under warranty? What steps does the dealer take if the battery has major issues in the future? It could be like a single cell went bad or the whole pack degraded significantly? What's the cost to fix or replace? Is there any kickback for quote unquote recycling an existing pack? So all these things around the battery. There might also be like certified pre-owned EVs that have some clause written up around the battery. So a lot of times if it's an older used EV, the battery won't be under warranty, and you just want to make sure you're going to be okay in the long run. There are people that are recycling packs or finding packs that were in a car that was in a crash, but the pack is still fine. So I saw some of that happening up in Phoenix here. So maybe more major cities, that might be an option too. I know some people are looking into making like more modern replacement packs for the old Nissan Leafs. That's something that was happening in New Zealand. So just kind of watch that space. Other things, ask the dealer, print out the inspection checklist and give me the, maintenance history, number of owners, etc. You get a Carfax, of course, but it's always helpful to ask that. If you live somewhere where there's a lot of summer heat, check if the battery has active cooling. Read reviews from people in your area. Try to park or charge in the shade. So my Leaf actually doesn't have active cooling, and it still works amazingly well. I was really worried about that, but it has a special, they call it the lizard pack. So anyway, make sure you get an extended test drive and check the charging before you actually purchase it. So try to drive around, try to go charge it up, see what your actual range is, look at what the battery temperature is, all those kinds of things. Like really check it out. Make sure that it might have level 1, level 2, and or level 3 charging available for it. Make sure that you've checked that you can charge with all those different methods that are available to you. That's super important. If you found out later on, I can't fast charge this car, but I was going to rely on that to, charge back up in 20 or 30 minutes, the car might also come with the charger for like plugging into your garage, like a 110 volt. Try that thing out. Make sure it works. You might need to get a different one if it's old or something like that. So also make sure you do a third-party inspection. So the dealer might say, we have our EV experts here, our mechanics, they've checked it all over, they've done all these different checks, but it's still a good idea. Just go get the basic electrical, suspension, all the different standard stuff that they would do for a used vehicle pre-purchase inspection. Have that done somewhere. It's definitely worth it. And you can share the dealer inspection report you got from the dealer with them just to verify, like, hey, was all this stuff done? Like my car looked pretty clean, but then I went to go change the cabin filter after I bought it, and it was so nasty. I was like, well, they didn't check that, so they're probably not going to be as thorough as you would be in doing your checks, right? So good thing is EVs don't have tons of moving parts, and they have less maintenance than normal cars. So again, it's all about that battery being in good health. So that's about it. I've loved driving my little Nissan Leaf around. It's fun. It's silent. I'm still getting used to that. When I accelerate, I'm used to hearing an engine sound. So that's a little bit funny. Sometimes I'm still like, oh, wow, it's so quiet. But I really appreciate that. So yeah, it's fun. It's easy to drive, pretty easy to keep it charged up. I haven't really had any major problems other than the last tip, I guess, is make sure you have a spare. Even like brand new EVs often don't have a spare tire, and that could be kind of problematic. So I actually got a bad one, when I went down to the food co-op, and I was pulling out and I hit this little sharp corner, and I had to get towed, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have a spare. So there are a couple companies that sell spares. that will fit your specific model. So I looked into those and I purchased one, like a lightweight one. You can also just like go on eBay and find a normal rim and tire for your car. Those are kind of a little bit bigger. So that's cheaper though. You might be able to look around town and find one as well. So yeah, that's pretty important. Make sure you have a spare and the right tools to change it. I've heard that if you just use the like fix-a-flat kind of stuff that comes with a lot of these cars, the guy at Firestone told me like, yeah, once you use that tire's kind of done. So it might get you home or whatever, but if that tire might have problems in the future, and like you might just have to buy a whole new tire. So a spare is a really good idea, along with whatever flat type of equipment they provide with the car, or those little cans of fix-a-flat or whatever. You might want to carry a pump around too. So just make sure you have all the right tools that will fit the lugs on your rims. Make sure you've really thought that through. So that's it. All right. I'd love to hear from you. My email is chris@diyEcoGuy.com. I'm on social media @DIYEcoGuy. Do you have any questions, topics you'd like me to cover? What's your perspective? What are you curious about? I'm here to help make sustainability more simple. So I look forward to sharing more with you on the next episode. And until then, thanks for listening to the DIY Eco Guy podcast. Take it easy and get rad.